We're here with Matt Hope from Darkson Designs, and he's going to give us a quick overview of AE-WWII.
So AE-WWII, it's Alternate Events World War II. It's a skirmish-based miniature game using the Darkson Designs AE World War II models. It's squad level, so each player gets between 10 and 15 models, sometimes more, sometimes less. What we have here is we have a small skirmish between the German geneticists of the SD and the American Tesla devices. Americans get technology based on the work of Nikola Tesla, and the Germans have genetically engineered monsters that they throw into the war. So right here, the game uses a alternating activation where a player activates a unit, takes various action points with the models in that unit, and then once they're done, the opposing player then activates a unit, takes all their action points with that model, and back and forth until all the players have activated all their units in the beginning of another turn. With the action points of each model, you can move, shoot, engage in close combat, use special abilities, and that sort of thing. Models have a varying number of action points based on their training level. Green troops, such as this unit of 3 GIs right here, they have only 1 action point each. Regular troops, such as the airborne, have 2 action points each. Veteran troops, such as our field mechanic, have 3 action points, and our elite, like our officer, has 4 action points. So shooting, range combat, is done by spending action points to fire your weapon. Weapons have a variable rate of fire. Some weapons, like the bolt action rifle of the sniper, require more than 1 action point to fire. Other weapons, like the officer's Thompson, have up to 4 or 5 shots per action point spent. In order to shoot, all models have a ranged combat attribute. That's the number or higher you need on a 6-sided dice to hit. If the shot is outside of half of the weapon's range, then you get a +1 penalty to hit. So the M1 Garands here have a range of 24 inches. The airborne have a range combat score of 4, which means if a model is within 12 inches, then they need a 4+ to hit. If they're outside of that, then they need a 5+ to hit. So these airborne, why don't we activate them? And they're going to try and fire on a unit of Wehrmacht here. So each airborne is a regular troop, so they have 2 action points each. So when you activate a unit, the squad has to remain within 4-inch coherency, but they can take their action points separate from each other. They can take them backwards and forwards any which way they'd like, in any order. They can fire on separate targets. All you need for a squad is 4-inch coherency, and they share a same drive value, morale value. So with this airborne is going to spend 1 action point to fire his M1 Garand at the Wehrmacht in the open. So we're going to measure range after we've declared the target, and he's just outside of short range. The M1 Garand has a range of 24 inches, so he has a range combat score of 4, so he needs a 5 to hit. So he missed, but he has another action point, so he's going to go ahead and take his second shot on the same Wehrmacht. And he hit. So in order to determine how much damage is done, you need to determine the total strength of the attack. Now, all ranged weapons have a static strength number and a variable number of 6-sided dice. Most weapons will have 1 6-sided dice, some will have 2 and more, like bazookas and Panzerschrecks. So what you're going to do is you're going to roll a die. In this case, the M1 Garand has a strength of 4 plus 1 6-sided dice. So it's a total strength of 6. Now, if the strength of the attack is 10 or lower, it inflicts only 1 wound on the target. Otherwise, it can inflict more wounds at a single time. So now that we've determined the total strength of the attack, we have to roll for this model's defense. Now, defense is done by every model having an armor attribute. The armor attribute for the Wehrmacht is a total of 3, so we're going to roll a die and add 3 to it. If that number equals to or exceeds the total strength of the attack, the defending model takes no wound. So why don't we roll to see if he can defend it? So he gets a total of 7, which is higher than the strength of the attack, so he blocks the shot. So those are both the action points from that airborne, and now we're going to take the action points from this airborne. Now, for movement, every model can spend an action point for movement and move up to their movement rating in inches. So in this case, most human models will have a movement rate of about 3. So the airborne has a movement of 3. So for one action point, he can move up to 3 inches in pretty much any direction in his forward arc. Models can alternatively spend all their action points for the entire round to sprint. And a sprint is up to triple the movement, and a sprint that ends in close combat will actually end in a charge, and then you follow it up with a close combat attack. So we'll just say that he's going to move here, and he's going to be done for now. Going over to this other squad of emaciated troopers. What?
Is 2 action points though, right?
Oh yeah, I wasn't sure if you wanted me to finish it.
No.
Or I was just going to, since we were halfway through.
Yep, we'll just go to the close combat.
So now that he's done with his combat, this squad of emaciated troopers is going to activate. Their only skill is being able to engage in close combat, and they're actually already in close combat with this squad of GIs. So close combat is done by taking each model and adding their close combat score to a 6-sided die roll. So we're going to activate these emaciated troopers. They're green troops, so they only have 1 action point apiece. So this soldier, this green emaciated soldier, is going to spend 1 action point to attack the GI in close combat. So the emaciated trooper has a close combat score of 4, so he rolls a die and adds 4 to it. So he gets a total of 8. The GI has a close combat score of 2, and he rolls a die and only adds 1 to it. So the emaciated trooper has exceeded his close combat score and successfully strikes the GI. Now, to determine the total strength of the attack, it's done the same way as ranged combat. However, you use the model's strength attribute. In this case, the emaciated trooper's strength is 3. And you roll a die 6 and add that to it. So it's a total strength of 9. Now the GI has an armor value of 3, so he needs a 6 to block the hit. So he doesn't, which means he's immediately killed and removed as a casualty. Now, since he's been removed as a casualty, we get into the morale system of our game, which is fairly different from most other games and is one of the gems of AE World War II. We have a very dynamic morale system based on a unit's drive. Units have a drive attribute, and units like the GIs share 1 drive value. Drive will then decrease as the game continues based on the number of casualties. So this GI team has suffered the loss of 1 of their models, so that squad loses 1 point of drive. So we have markers that we can use to show that they're now -1 to their drive. They have a total drive of 3. Now they're at a drive of 2. If a unit's drive ever reaches 0, then the unit routes. If the unit is in close combat when their drive hits 0, they immediately surrender and are removed off the field. The way to mitigate these drive losses is by using your officers, over here and over here, to use the command ability to then spend 1 action point and increase the drive value of this unit by 1 for every action point you spend. They can only use that ability within 12 inches, and they can only remove 1 point of drive for every action point they spend. So as the game progresses, your officers need to basically run around the battlefield and use their action points to bolster the morale of their troops. If they don't do that, then they're going to start routing, and then that begins a cascade effect where once 1 unit enters route, the drive of the rest just decreases, and so on and so forth until the entire army runs away. So your commanders are very important for the morale of your troops. In the game, we also have a very dynamic, very interesting scenario system where before actually getting together for a game, players determine if they want to run a planned scenario or an unplanned scenario. Planned scenarios, you determine the scenario ahead of time, you determine who's the attacker and defender, and then you build your army list. That way you can gear your army for the specific objectives of the battle. Unplanned scenarios, you make your army list ahead of time, then roll the scenario, then determine attacker and defender to represent the fog of war and to basically make it so that you don't know what you're up against. Each scenario has 3 objectives. Primary objective, which only one side can achieve based on the scenario, secondary objectives that are drawn in secret, and then finally the attrition rate. At the end of the scenario, you add up who achieved which objectives, and whichever side achieved the most wins, though the games can often end in ties.